Greetings, everybody, and it's Thursday night and 7:30 in the Central Time Zone, so that means it's time for cinematic conversations, and I hope you all are ready for a fascinating conversation. I think more people will show up as the night goes along. And so tonight we're going to talk about a film that I am very fond of, and I've seen, what, about 5 times by now, by Elizabeth Coffman and Mark Bosco. And I've done now, what, 3 Q&As with you, Elizabeth, and a podcast, and I've never had an opportunity
Close to that.
yeah, talk to Mark. So why don't we start, because Mark, the project really started with you, is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Why don't we start to talk about, like, why you decided that a film about Flannery O'Connor was something that was needed in the world?
So I've been working on Flannery O'Connor essays and different conferences for about almost 2 decades, well, over 2 decades now, and I was very much aware that her story was just being told as biography by Brad Gooch and others, really in the early 2000s, and I always thought, her story was a compelling one, right? She's just something unique about her. And really, it came to pass that a good friend of mine, Chris O'Hare, who's one of our executive producers, I was actually doing research in England, where he lives, for a Graham Greene book that I was doing. And he says, listen, I knew that he loved Flannery O'Connor. He had met Sally Fitzgerald, the great friend and editor of O'Connor's letters and essays. And he, in 1998, as people were beginning to pass away and who really knew her, he went and filmed, and he's a film producer himself. So he filmed at a very high quality these interviews, and he just had some really good questions. Of course, he's off camera. So anyway, he gave this to me and said, listen, I thought I was going to do something with them. I'm not going to do anything with them. You're actually doing the research. Why don't you take them? Great friend, it was a great gift. And really, I had them for about 3 or 4 years before I knew what to do with them, because I was still finishing another project. But then we did a Flannery O'Connor conference in 2011 in Chicago. And I asked Elizabeth, because we were colleagues, I was in the English department, she was in the communications. And I said, would you just help me film some of the people that are going to be at this conference? Because I'd like to kind of get this on camera, get some footage.
And let me guess, the first thing she said is, do you have any money for this?
I think so. I told her I'd take her for a drink, a martini. I think that was what actually, so she said, okay.
Mark's a good cook, so he cooked me some Italian supper.
Yeah.
But really so I think Elizabeth was a little skeptical at the beginning of all this, but then I showed her Chris's films, which is about 12, 13 hours, I guess, total. And of these long interviews of people that were close to him. And I think Elizabeth says, we have something, and we really should we should go for this. And really that's where we kind of started. And we went down to Andalusia, that we started getting these interviews, and tried to use Chris's interviews as kind of the backbone of the arc of the story. Is that about right, Elizabeth?
Yeah, well, the interviews were so good, and I knew the people Chris had interviewed were so important that my first thought was, let's archive this, let's restore the video, get it cleaned, and then let's apply for an NEH grant. And we got an NEH grant, which allowed us to really step it up and hire wonderful composers and animators and make it a real national production. So let's
pause here for a second, because that's a really big deal. Like applying for grants, probably many people on this call have applied for a grant from some point, but applying for NEH grant is a little bit different than applying for a grant. They require an awful lot of material. So do you want to talk about sort of how we go from this idea of, like, we got this footage, we got a team, you got the two of you said we're going to do this, and
Ted.
And Ted, okay, so that you got this awesome threesome there, And how do we sort of get the idea, okay, so what we really need to do this is to do an NEH grant, which is like you're going for like the most difficult grant, like right at the beginning. And then as you develop what this project will be, how did that grant proposal, which is a lengthy document, emerge? Like, how did the two of you begin the process of writing that grant and finding all the researchers and getting all that paperwork? Because that is as hard as making a film is doing the NEH grant.
Well, I don't think Mark knew when I said, hey, PBS suggested we apply for an NEH grant. He knew what we were getting into. But the National Endowment for the Humanities grants are really, I mean, this is where our team, as, Mark's background as a scholar and my own background as a scholar, paid off, because you really they want educators, they want specialists in the field to be writing letters of support about why this project is both valid, interesting, and will be an increase to the field of study. So that Mark was great at getting advisors on the board and some top scholars who wrote us letters of support. And I brought in the filmmaking team, executive producer Bob Hercules, who had done the American Masters doc on Maya Angelou, was our EP, signed on early. And so that combination was enough. Also, American Masters was interested from the beginning from our trailer and our unique footage that we had. So I flew to New York and got Michael Cantor to at least write us a letter of interest and support. And that all helped apply for the NEH grant. And I didn't get it.
But if truth be told, we got on our second time, tried.
Oh, right.
We did our first time.
Just assume you're not going to get it the first application. Assume
they were really good to us, though. They said, this is where, it was very good, but apply again next year. You might want to do this. I mean, so they were really helpful. Try to give us. I think they showed that they really wanted us to get it. It just didn't make the top list at the beginning, first year.
So this is a stupid question, but how many pages was that NEH application?
With the budget was really one of the harder parts, and I had the biggest learning curve with that.
Yeah. I think it's 40, something like that.
In the old days, it was like 300. But,
no, it's not. It wasn't that bad.
No, it was about 35 to 40 pages, and that included everything. So
that's pretty good. So in working on this, how did the relationship in writing the grant kind of move in the same way as it did towards making the film? Because this is the beginning of a path the two of you were going on together.
I think it did. I know Elizabeth would say, I think what it did is it focused us that, we're making a movie. Here's the beginning, the middle, the end. This is what we want to accomplish. And so all of a sudden, I think Elizabeth and I were talking, or at least Elizabeth was talking. I thought I was talking just about how this is going to work, And so I think we got to some of the down to some of the ingredients of the film by just doing this grant. Wouldn't you agree? I don't know.
Well, I knew we had a great opportunity with the footage, and it was a step up, and we got some great interviews to get going and have some great partners in Chicago to work with. And I live with a great cinematographer who turned out to be a sound designer too. And the combination, one of our biggest challenges is that there's only one interview of Flannery O'Connor, and there aren't many photographs for making a feature-length film. So we had the shortage of footage to draw from, so we had to think creatively. The Trust also was not letting us do dramatic reenactments, but I got the Trust to agree to let us do voice reenactments. So we were able to hire Mary Steenburgen to do Flannery's voice. And they approved motion graphics for the fiction, for doing the illustrations in the fiction. So
it was a journey of getting the Trust really to allow us to really do things. And by 2018, they were all in, which was really nice. But I think it took a while because we've been working on this for a long time. But the beginning was like we couldn't even and they wouldn't let us take any text. I mean, it was really. Remember when we were in Villageville, Elizabeth? I mean, that very first time we were doing stuff. But by the time a few years later, I think that they were okay with what we were doing. They thought it was a good thing.
Yeah, I never accepted we weren't going to use her text.
And Bart, Bart, it's a great question because films are miracles in a way. There's so many people that want to make films and try and start. So finishing, yeah, exactly. Finishing them is a. But anyway, I think what Mark just said is filmmaking is about perseverance, and so Mark, the origin story of all these amazing interviews that were done, decades ago. There's definitely something there, and then Mark is sitting, in your mind, you have all of this scholarship and all of the connections, right? And so that's all great, but then as you know, a film is assembled from decision to decision, edit to edit, image to image, sound to, so what did we, we couldn't just put together the older interviews. So Elizabeth started down looking at found footage, stock footage, photographs and things like that. But then we started just shooting. So early on, we, remember Mark, we were wondering, scheduling an interview, will this be enough? And how many interviews do we need? And as we would drive through Milledgeville and Atlanta and Savannah, we just literally got out of the car. I mean, we planned this, but we literally got out of the car and just were shooting and shooting and shooting. And Bart, you'll appreciate this. We were tracing the red dirt of Georgia. Like, red dirt is going to reveal that we're in Georgia.
The red clay.
Yeah, red clay, but red soil, like that's going to signify, place and location. I never did find, yeah, right. I never found it to my satisfaction. So, but there's some redness of.
Well, we had some good color correction.
Right. Yeah. But that's the toiling part, and it's perseverance. As both Elizabeth and Mark were really toiling on conceptual and connections like that, and then we, driving a lot is probably how this film got made. Until we started flying and doing other interviews.
But it's slightly different in a sense because here, getting the NEA grant, you at least had some of this paid. You weren't doing this out of your pocket, although I'm sure it costs a lot more money. So you sort of going on a trip and driving and being in the car. You don't have to be like, oh my God, we're going to run out of money and we have to go home because we can't afford it anymore. And I think that really kind of makes a difference. So I want to talk a little bit still more about this sense of how the two of you collaborate, because Mark, you come from a world of you are the knowledge expert in this process. And, I've done a project, I worked on a series about the Second Vatican Council. And when I started that, I didn't know anything about Catholicism. I didn't even know what Vatican II was. I was like, so what was Vatican I? Why would they have a second one? And now I probably know more about Catholicism than 98% of Americans. It's because it's the process of making the film. And of course, Elizabeth and Ted are very seasoned and really great filmmakers. So like, how does this work goes? Like, you have an idea, say, we should be doing this. And then you tell Elizabeth, say, well, maybe we should do it this way. And then says, Ted, well, maybe we should do this. Can you find like a moment where there was that kind of thread of the way in which the three of you work together?
I think early on I learned to leave room and space and kind of bow to what Elizabeth and Ted could do. And I think that when it came to things about theology, the theological imagination of Flannery, I did a lot of fundraising, and it meant a lot of talking to a lot of different people. I mean, so there was a kind of a bowing down to our we kind of knew each other's talents.
Mm-hmm.
And I must say, I had to learn everything. And so I think I was more wanting at the beginning, I wanted this kind of, the person that I thought I knew, which was this Catholic Flannery, and Elizabeth kept on trying to push me to open it up into, listen, this is for everyone, and some of that Catholic stuff will get lost if we do this. And so we have a lot of videotape and a lot of interview with people, because that's what I was focused on. But there was enough that was there that was bigger, so that we didn't use it all. So I do think there was a bowing down to each other's, talents. I don't think we really got into any fights. There's a couple of things that I said I wanted in the film. Yeah. And Elizabeth says, well, I want this in the film, and I think we got what we, but it was really
both compromised, right?
Yeah, we did compromise. We really did, yeah.
But I would ask questions, and Ted also, we would ask Mark, the O'Connor scholar, questions like, well, what kind of music did she listen to? Or, look, here's an album of the Singing Nun in her room. And so we would look for, both interesting things to photograph, as well as how to capture her, her point of view, her experience. What was she listening to? What was she looking at? What were the sounds outside? What were the insects? We researched what insects in Georgia we would have heard for, sound. Miss Ted wound up doing sound design.
And birds.
And birds, right? We wanted it to be, and we were both on boards of archives, so we both wanted to I got archival footage of the Klan from Georgia. And, I really wanted it to be, the archival footage to be specific to Georgia as much as possible and the South. So
to that point,
we kept obsess on it.
Yeah, in that point, so Elizabeth and I together were realizing, because 2015 Black Lives Matter happens, and we always knew race was going to be part of it. I'm not, maybe Elizabeth always knew it was going to be as much as it was, but I think in 2015 I realized that I needed to we needed to delve much more into this. Not that we wouldn't have done it before, but it just seemed to be like, this is a moment to talk about Flannery O'Connor, her, living during the dismantling of Jim Crow, a kind of the sense that she takes these takedowns that she has of people with white privilege and this culture of racism. So it was just all of a sudden I think we became, I don't know, I think there was a moment when in 2015 when I thought, okay, we're really kind of more on the same page about having to kind of get the texture of both Southern reality in the 1950s and 60s, as well as how she's uniquely positioned as an artist through her faith and through her craft to upend some of that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important, and of course, it's one of the things that I wanted to make sure we talked about tonight. She's very unique in that she has this sort of, Catholicism is a very core part of her life, and the Southern culture is very much of a part of her life. And all of that comes through with the writing. Issues of race are all the way through the material, but it's a very complicated relationship. Elizabeth, do you want to talk about how you were thinking about navigating that? Because it is, of the issues that one tends to look at this moment, one of the things that a lot of people start to talk about her and the work. And I think you did a really good job at sort of dealing with this, but I mean, it's a very hard and difficult thing.
Certainly. Well, I was born and raised in Jacksonville, Florida, just south of Savannah, where, I grew up watching Gone with the Wind was like a religious experience. I mean, you just kind of, as a white person, I had to watch Gone with the Wind. So I was very happy to discover that Flannery O'Connor really despised Gone with the Wind, and in fact wrote a great short story, A Late Encounter with the Enemy, that makes complete fun of the premiere in Atlanta, Georgia, where Hattie McDaniel was not allowed to go, even though she won the first Oscar for a Black woman for that film. So I, having grown up in a South that was, and still is, segregated in many ways, and race, and racist. When I first read some of O'Connor's letters, like where she was commenting about James Baldwin and Martin Luther King and making all these comments about she didn't trust them, they're sort of prophet pontificating, I knew that the film had to address and include some of this, as well as this question of James Baldwin. So we got great interviews with Alice Walker and Hilton Alls from the New Yorker, where both of them, in wonderful pieces that have been published and talked about for a long time, discuss Flannery O'Connor and race and contextualize her comments. It's not being defensive, it's contextualizing her comments and understanding, when you look at her fiction, from the age of 20, she was writing about racial relations from a critical perspective and a social justice perspective, from her very first short stories up until the end when she's dying in the hospital and she's writing in the hospital bed. She's still obsessed with this question of America's greatest sin. So whatever, personal comments she made that are really not PC or even early on racist, the film, Mark and I both really believe that the film contextualizes these questionable comments in connection to the fiction that she wrote, where if anything, she is critiquing her own perspective. She's critiquing her own understanding of what white racist, how they spoke, how they treated other white people as well as Black people, and stereotype them and diminish them. So I'm, after spending a lot of time really reading and thinking about just how to categorize her beliefs, I'm pretty comfortable with what we do in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do a quite admirable job with this, because she did have a change. And as we were talking the other day about this, when you're young and you're living in a small town, what world perspective could you have other than the world perspective of the people around you? I mean, how could you realistically expect her to think otherwise? Where would she have gotten that from? Where could she have gotten woke, in today's terminology? And then she goes away, and then she kind of changes what she has a bit of a different understanding. So those early comments, to me, are kind of excusable. How would she know something different?
Well, she figured out early on that, and in her stories and in the film over and over, she's critiquing or deconstructing, whatever you want to say, parents, the parental figure, the racist parental figure who is in the artificial end story, deliberately teaching a child to be racist, right? How is it done? How do you look at people of different skin colors? And so over and over again, we see mothers, fathers, grandparents being critically represented as problematic because they are trying to pass on their values to their children. So I think O'Connor in her own life understood, as much as she loved her mother and her mother helped take care of her after she had lupus, she understood what was problematic about her mother's language and beliefs.
And if I can just push it, and it goes back to her Catholic sensibility, she knew racism was wrong. She knew it was a sin. And she's indicting herself. She's in those stories. She's Holga in Good Country People. She calls herself Mrs. Turpin. She's Ruby Turpin, the racist. So I think she wants to turn that light even on her own darkness, even as she's grown. And I wouldn't say it's a kind of a purgatorial act on her part where she wants to kind of make amends, because I don't think that's too clever and too well put together. But there is something about the fact that as she continues to write, by the time you get to Everything That Rises Must Converge and these late stories, I mean, there is a real sense that I see Flannery O'Connor, turning the light on her and everyone. As she says, a pox on all of us, right? There's something that we're broken in this racial world, in this racist world, and so that develops. And I think that's what's missing in some of the conversation around Flannery, is that as you said, early on, you know, as a teenager, as a 16-year-old, is one thing. It's another thing to be in banter with a woman who's a dear friend living in New York, who's actually a civil rights leader, you know, artist. So they're playing parts, they're performing different things, and context is really everything. So I do think that's really important. I think that she knew that it was wrong, and I think that she knew that that was part of her that she needed to let go of or change.
So thank you. That was really wonderful from both of you. So the film, I've been to several screenings of them, and every screening is a good experience. If people enjoy and get a lot out of the film. Yet some of the reviews are not as enthusiastic as the people who actually watched the film a few times and got something out of it. Do you think that perhaps their perception of race taints the perspective of the reviewers?
You know, that's an impossible question to a certain extent. Maybe, you know, we were delighted to be the first winner of the Library of Congress Ken Burns Award, and a few reviewers have commented on, yeah, it's an American Masters film, or it's meant for television. You know, it's maybe not avant-garde cinema that we did, and I'm fine with all of those comments. I even, you know, for reviewers who have a hard time with the animation, or they're like, oh, all the documentaries are doing animation now. You know what? I'm fine with those comments too. It's like,
I love my film. I love our film, and I don't. Who cares what they say? The people who did the negative ones, I just thought when I finished it, you don't know Flannery O'Connor. You watched this and did no kind of engagement, and you did not encounter this artist. And everybody who gives us one, you could tell. And they'll even say, I remember reading Flannery O'Connor in high school, and I remember this story, A Good Man's Hard to Find. And that's usually part of their review, you know, and then they give us some space to kind of commend, and they can still be, you know, negative in parts. But the real negative ones, I'm like, did you see that? Actually, a friend of mine, after one of them said, did that critic watch the same film I watched? Yeah. You know, it was completely different.
I mean, who was that New York Times reviewer? I never heard of him.
Right. I actually looked and see like what he wrote about that I cared about, and there was nothing I wanted to read. Anything I just didn't want to read it. But it's like I don't know.
Hey, Bart, let me add something to this. So I don't think I've actually told Mark this, but from some, you know, driving again, when we would drive through Milledgeville, sometimes we would meet someone who knew Flannery, and in particular, we got invited to lunch, and then someone who actually went to Flannery's house as a young girl, and who's now a cartoonist in Georgia, loved Flannery as well. So we kept absorbing these stories, and this one particular family told us about the jail in the town of Milledgeville, where mostly a lot of people who got locked up were African-American and African-American men, and their wives would bring them supper, and there was sometimes singing, and you know, it's just like an interesting
outside the prison,
outside the jail downtown. So it was an interesting, you know, sort of local collar scene. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is that Elizabeth just mentioned that one of the farmhands was jailed for excessive drinking or something like that. And so it was like, there's the connection, you know, like somehow when we drove through the town, I was always looking for something to shoot, some kind of sound design, but mostly visual context to give the local color of a writer's life. Because as a person who couldn't really walk around very much, every day they would, you know, a lot of days they would go to lunch at the same restaurant, and they had minimal sort of navigation as far as we know around the town, but there was some. And I was on the hunt for like what would reveal more insight into this writer, into this creative process. And the jail story just came a little bit too late in connecting to Flannery. You know, Elizabeth would have done her magic in finding the right stock footage. Mark would have been on the hunt for like, where's some more context? And, you know, so films are like paintings in a way, and you eventually have to stop painting and just, you know, go on to the next painting. But I think the lack of maybe not lack, but I to Mark's point, I think we feel proud about the film, the work we did. But on the other hand, I think there's an openness because it's so hard, and very few biographies even add this moment-to-moment context of Flannery's life. We did it a lot in her house. We shot sort of where she would sit, we've talked about this before, what she would have looked out windows and things like that.
We went to her church. We tried to find where she would have lunch with her mother every day.
Right, but that's my take on some of the reviews that actually are, to your point, are about projection of things that the reviewer wants to say. And it's a bit of an open season right now in terms of this awfulness of racism. And racism itself is an idea that oftentimes becomes lived experience. And so, but they are separate, and making those distinctions between lived experiences and sort of these very dark ideas is something we worked hard on. But it has a challenge of a writer who has such rich writing that we spend a lot more time on the rich writing aspect.
So you know, in trying to build that universe, you did a really great job with the archival footage, as you talked about, really creating finding images that bring those things to life. And there's only so much footage of her to go from. You know, that early thing is just kind of an amazing find. And then there's the animation. And as one of the reviewers said, like there's too like that's the genre. But like there's so many you could like complain about 1 million documentaries because they have animation, and the animation in this film is totally integrated to the visual style of the film. It is totally connected to who she was, and it's so cool. And you have not just one style of animation. So it's like, what's your problem with this animation? It just doesn't, you know, I don't know. So you want to talk just a little bit about like how you came up with all these different animators to get these different visual styles? Because I think that's a very, to me, a really kind of wonderful part of the film that I cherish a lot.
Sure. Well, one of the first animators, you know, I was quizzing Mark on, it's like, well, we were trying to think about how to illustrate. I'm like, what are some images that you've seen or that you teach that you think really visualize O'Connor's story? And so he found an image from the animator Natalie Barahona, and it's like, this really gets to her fiction. Natalie had already done an illustration for an O'Connor story, and so we contacted her. She was interested. One of my editors, the main co-editor Joe Winston, showed me this music video from Freakwater that was great, done by she was living in Chicago then, bartender at the Hideout, great bar here in Chicago, Kathleen Judge. Went to RISD, completely talented filmmaker. I saw the music video, I'm like, I love it. Mark saw it, he loved it. So we contacted Kathleen, she was interested. Then I was at the Ann Arbor Film Festival.
And I introduced.
Yes, Ann Arbor Film Festival, saw this great film at Ann Arbor by Heidi Kumau called Swallowed Whole, about when she broke her back. Was really trying to find some imagery to represent Flannery with lupus and walking on crutches and challenges, you know, with movement. And Heidi Kumau, who teaches at the University of Michigan, just great artist, animator. So we wound up going with these 3 female animators, and they all dug into Flannery O'Connor's work. Heidi Kumau got herself a fellowship to Georgia, went down to Milledgeville, studied the house and the flora and the fauna. Kathleen loves Flannery O'Connor, and Natalie already loved Flannery O'Connor. So all 3 women were really into her storytelling and got the idea of what we were going for in terms of thinking of Flannery. I mean, Kathleen really had Flannery as an avatar in the animations. And then our 4th motion graphics artist, Matt Rappaport, who is here in Chicago with us, really talented. We've worked with him on a number of films for doing some wonderful text animation and all the quotes and titles.
You know, there really is a major part of the film. Do you want to talk just a little bit about the archival material and where you found it and what you were trying to accomplish specifically, like one scene particularly you could talk about?
Sure. Well, again, once we got the NEH grant and had a little extra cash, I wound up hiring 2 archival researchers and clearance people. And the great Pat Lofthouse here in Chicago's won Emmys before, and Laura Cohen also both just did wonderful work finding stuff at the Library of Congress, the National Archives, as well as, you know, we wound up preserving PBS adaptations of O'Connor stories that were like locked in a producer's closet. So for The Displaced Person, and we wound up paying some restoration cost and getting things cleaned and digitized, as well as Joe, I think, editor found footage on YouTube from Georgia. There was just tragically not a lot of great archival footage from the 1940s, 50s when we were looking of the South, not surprisingly, on some level. So we found footage on YouTube, contacted the owners, and they sent us DVDs. And again, we paid to have it restored and are donating that back to the University of Georgia and other footage to Emory, which has her.
Really? Yeah, good.
But the most Flannery-esque moment, Rick Pralinger. Tell him the Rick Pralinger story.
That's great. It's great. I just love Rick.
Yeah, well, Rick Pralinger, MrArchive.org, saw him at a conference and walked up to him and said, listen, we're doing a doc on Flannery O'Connor, trying to find archival footage that really represents her sense of humor, you know, her relationship to her mother. And that's all I said. And he goes, Texas, knife-throwing mother, look it up.
Nuns. I think he said Texas, knife-throwing mother, nuns.
And there's just the footage in the film of this mother.
Flannery would have loved it. Oh my God. It would have been the start. It would have been the story. It would have definitely been another story if she had seen that.
Right. So finding that footage and footage of a woman lying on a bed of nails, which, you know, that's Lucinda Williams gave us rights to some music. Lucinda met Flannery as a child. Yeah. And her father, Miller, the poet, Miller Williams, was really Flannery helped inspire and helped him inspire him to be a poet on some level. So Lucinda had written lyrics, and so found archival footage of a woman lying on a bed of nails. And so just really, really pushing to try to represent her sense of humor and grotesque, gothic kind of stuff with funky archival footage.
It worked really well. Yeah. And the Rick story is really great because he has this all in his subconscious. And he's done that for me. You know, I need a film about something. Oh, you need that. And back in the day, that would mean it's in this garage, which is over here. Let me drive over here and get that for you. But that's the kind of guy he is. You have a lot of very important people in this film, people that are pretty hard to get to say, yeah, I'll sit down and do an interview with you. How did you get so many of them?
Well, I asked them. I knew that everybody we got, I knew that they had said something in the media or an interview, or even, you know, like Alice Walker. I had been teaching that Alice Walker essay on Flannery O'Connor for 10 years. So, you know, and I just been to London to see Chris, and I saw the Alice Walker film that was done, and it was showing already in London before it showed in California. So I mentioned that to her in this long email, and, you know, it was just really about that. It was just, I mean, almost to a person, they were like, yeah, Flannery O'Connor, she's so important. Of course, I'll do it. There was one or two that I think we had to, you know, was a little surprised, but really, for the most part, it was just, I knew what people said. Let's go and ask them if they'll do it. What can they say, you know? No, and we really wanted a diverse group, right? And so it was really important to have people of color, people, have women, men, Catholics, non-Catholics, people who were in the arts and crafts, and people who were not, you know? So yeah, I don't know how to say it. It just, that was the most fun for me, was just to sit down and start the, you know, and I would be at the camera, and Elizabeth and, well, Ted would have his 20, 30 minutes, you know, making sure everything is right and get the sound going.
20 or 30 minutes?
Well, okay, maybe 60.
Right. You know, yeah,
No,
that's not enough.
that was
If you give me another minute here, I can just get that cake. Just, no.
Yeah.
No, wait, yeah, but you want it to look good. You have this person there that is a rare opportunity. You want to make it look as great as it can be.
Yeah, no, Ted was great. Matter of fact, we went back after we did Brad Gooch, who was just one of the great biographers, and because I think Ted and Elizabeth just said the sound is not right. It's not, so we redid a lot of that in a year later, and he was gracious enough to sit for us again and really kind of say the same things, you know, added one thing here or there, but that was, you know, that was quite wonderful. Yeah.
You want to talk about the voiceover, and how you got?
She got that for us.
Yes, I wrote Mary Steenburgen's agent a heartfelt letter about her talent as she had portrayed Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, writer. I mean, I grew up in Florida, and she had portrayed this writer, and then just, you know, Mark and I both felt she'd be perfect and to do the voiceover. And she and Ted Danson have done a lot of environmental filmmaking, and we've done environmental filmmaking too, and it just was not difficult.
She was so kind and so professional. I am telling you, it was really a lovely, lovely day with her. We flew out. She did 3 takes each time for each thing, and I mean, it was really extraordinary, wasn't it, Elizabeth, Ted? I think that was so much fun.
Yeah, very generous. I mean, there was, Bart, a list of people we were pursuing. As you know, Holly Hunter is from Conyers, and some things like that. So it's interesting to kind of like think about people to like pursue on the list. And then once Mary's name came up, it was like, oh, let's try it, you know. And then,
can I tell a funny story? At least I thought it was funny. But so, you know, Mary's voice is beautiful, but it can be a bit sultry, you know. And halfway through it, she was getting more sultry. I was like, wait a minute, you have to go step back and become Flannery O'Connor again, because Flannery O'Connor doesn't sound that sexy, you know. but Mary was like, and she immediately. But I thought it was like, okay, wait. No, we have to do that one again.
Well, and an Arkansas accent is not a Georgia accent. Right? There's some big differences there, but she had studied. I mean, she did a good job. She had worked on the accent, I think.
She really did. She's
No, that's
wonderful.
the difference between working with people that are real professionals that can, give you that when you need it. And I thought that worked really well. Well, does somebody have any questions out there? Leslie, do you want to ask your question here?
I forgot what I wrote. What did I write?
I'm looking at it.
When you were talking before, I wrote, as a philosopher I once studied with said, nothing is independent of the observer. I was remarking the reviewers. So I think you always have to keep that in mind, what their historical conversations are, what they've learned and what they know. And you just really have to kind of look around that and work around that. And we're going to get more and more of that. I sent Bart recently something that was happening here in North Texas about the music department at UNT. Yeah, and I think that's going to become more and more. And it does get more difficult in the humanities and arts about that as well.
Man.
Yeah, the world has changed, right? And the film is coming out into a different world, and it has to be taken in that context. So I agree.
Yeah, and none of us is independent of our observations. And some philosophers would say there's no such thing as an objective reality. It's all subjective any way you look at it, just a matter of degree. So there you are.
Say that there is no truth in cinema. By putting a camera one place, you are having a perspective. And
exactly. What you choose, what you don't choose, the positioning of it, how loud, how soft, who's in it, who's not in it, everything.
Everything is an artistic decision to make
everything.
Understand the world in a certain way. Raquel, do you want to read this, or would you like me to read it? Oh, yes. What Raquel says wants me to read. Kelly, you wanted to say something. You had your hand up, Kelly. You have to turn your microphone on.
Okay, hi. It says Mark Wickersham. I'm Kelly Kitchens. So I was really taken by the letters, the exchange letters between her and I can't remember the woman's name, but what a treasure.
Or Betty Hester.
Yeah. How did you find and have both sets? Because typically, you just have your own set of what you received, but not necessarily what you've sent out. So I was just curious about that.
There's like 177 letters between Betty and Flannery. And Flannery kind of used it as her own way of trying to engage this remarkable woman that got her stories, but also to kind of set out a kind of, almost like with a friend, being able to kind of set out her beliefs about faith, art, and all that kind of stuff. Betty's letters were actually finally given over to Emory, although I don't think we really read from them, did we? We did not. Bill Sessions got them to Emory, but I don't think they're in our film. But if you read through her letters one by one, Flannery O'Connor is picking up with whatever was going to be on the conversation. So you do get a sense of a real relationship growing. As Sally Fitzgerald says in the film, they're the real treasures. I mean, there's no doubt that they're the real treasures of O'Connor. Those in Marriott, I think Flannery was vulnerable to somebody who was a friend for the first time with Betty, and then she was, I think with Marriott, she was challenged in that friendship. And so you have these two different kinds of friendships that kind of speak to two different aspects of both friendship and to Flannery's engagement with people. So yeah, they're just beautiful letters.
So check out the book, The Habit of Being, which is an award-winning collection of her letters. And
The Habit of Being, it's 800 pages, but it's well worth it. I've read it over and over again. I'm teaching a Flannery O'Connor seminar. The students are going to read every single letter. It's part of the course. They have to read something like 50 a week just to be, as we go through the course.
So are they just her letters,
Yes.
or letters that were to her? Oh.
No, these are just her letters to people. Yeah, these are letters to her friends and her, we don't, Regina burned a lot of stuff, her mother. So we don't have a lot of stuff. We have found some letters. So there's a new book out by Ben, what's Ben's last name? Where we now have the letters to Caroline Gordon, a few Jesuits actually from Loyola, New Orleans, who she was in conversation with, who were in Conyers at the time. So we do now have about 2 or 3 other books. There's a new book out by Christine Flanagan. It was all of the correspondence back and forth with Caroline Gordon, who in some ways was a kind of a mentor for how to write the perfect short story. She would give all of her stuff to it. And she would write these long letters back. And Flannery kind of took some advice and some she didn't. But so we're now finding those letters now. But when we were working on the film, those things were still not even opened for archival research.
All right, so I'm going to read Raquel's question. Elizabeth, did you see Shirley? I wondered if you saw any parallels to women writers. Shirley Jackson was also considered dark and sharp, aggressive and dark in the writing. Did Flannery not seem so in her life?
Hi, Raquel. Thanks for asking a question. I have not seen Shirley yet. It's on my list to see. I've been too busy making and finishing a film to really watch many films, but I'm dying to watch it.
Yeah.
And this question of Flannery as a so-called woman writer, and her relation to other women writers. I mean, part of what's interesting about Flannery, I think, is that she wanted to be considered just a great writer, right? She was no activist, she was no feminist. She just wanted to be a great writer, and she read other women writers and male writers within that context. So it's an interesting thing that I think it comes across in her film that she she just really wanted to be up there with the Robert Lowells and the William Faulkners, right? So men were more privileged, but she certainly, with Catherine Ann Porter, Eudora Welty, other Southern writers, she had a lot of connection with them, as well as the way in which these writers approached the darkness of the South. So I think Flannery's writing, to me, is some of the more aggressive in a certain perspective, to quote a word you're using. Where Shirley Jackson, I don't know, Mark, was there any connection to Shirley Jackson?
No, there wasn't that I know of, at least in my research. I think that they certainly do have this kind of, dark Gothic sensibility. I think that the upending of assumptions about life certainly are played into it, and so in some ways they're very much akin. I'm not as familiar with Beyond the Lottery. I thought it was interesting as people were seeing our film. They're saying, "Oh yeah, I read one of her Flannery's short stories, The Lottery," and you want to go back and say, "No, that was actually Shirley Jackson," But people think, "Oh, that has to be Flannery, right?" Because it's that same kind of aesthetic, that same dramatic ending. O'Connor was always. I think there's only one story where there is not redemption, The Comforts of Home. And she says that. She says that's the one story. There's no moment of violent grace even in that story when she wrote that one. And she said she was kind of surprised when it finished too, that it ends with just that kind of darkness. I think it would be the closest thing to a Shirley Jackson, which also kind of ends with that darkness.
And the New Yorker just reprinted The Lottery.
And we almost watched it last night, Raquel. So I think Harry Mason won out, but maybe tonight. But I'm interested in getting to know her work a little bit more because Shirley Jackson and she wrote in particular sort of towards the horror and sort of thriller genre. And what's interesting about Flannery's work is that it's sort of genre-less. Like there's something so nuanced and exploratory or revelatory is probably the best word, because I think she was really channeling Kierkegaard in a lot of her writing, where as she's writing, she's discovering. And so she's trying to listen to the surroundings and all the notes and things that she did. You know, and Mark has heard many people write and read much more secondary literature than I have about Flannery. But I, you know, like some of the reviewers that missed the mark on our film, they say certain things that sort of betray someone's awareness of some of these philosophers. So to Leslie's point earlier, it's like, that's really interesting about Flannery, and something I continue to think about is this very straight up channeling of a Kierkegaardian tormented way of hunting for a revelation.
She loved the Russians. She loved Dostoevsky. She read Heidegger.
She read Paul Tillich. She read Paul Tillich, the great Protestant theologian. Loved his book Courage to Be. She read Teilhard de Chardin right after he was off the Index of Forbidden Books. Bart knows all about that from Vatican II. But I mean, in some ways, she was a voracious reader of very important stuff. And the reason that the only reason I think she did reviews for the diocesan Catholic newspaper in Atlanta was they would send her books, and she got to decide what she was going to review. So she's so smart. So she got all these free books, you know. And I'm sure the people that were opening this up, why would somebody want to read Heidegger? Why would somebody? Who is this? How do you write a review on that? You know. So in some ways, she was a voracious writer. So very much influenced by French philosophy. I would say that's probably her biggest influence. And then from French, then you definitely have Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky, and you have that kind of existentialism. She's right there in the 1940s and 50s.
She's a modernist.
She's a World War II, trying to deal with trauma and the ways we disguise our trauma in triumphant Americanism and things like that.
She was no naive Southern, just happened to be a good writer who wasn't worldly. The
only similarity I saw was the way they were treated. Like, there's so many films about genius, conventionally unattractive men, and they're revered, and they were both treated like the weirdo woman. I don't know how true to life that Shirley is a fiction, but I mean, she's treated horribly by everybody. So it just was interesting to me, because those are the only two women I can think of that had that kind of historical standing. But, you know, Stephen Hawking and all those guys, it was just like, oh, but they're a genius, you know. We put up with it, and with these two women,
well,
it wasn't.
Welcome to the world of,
Well, and also, like, you know, maybe Mark, you can talk about, Flannery would write in the mornings, but then in the afternoons, if she had the energy, she would have these salons where they would discuss these books that she's reading, and some people were able to also introduce books to be read at these places as well. And that's, you know, in thinking back again at that local color of moment to moment experience, you know, I think the house has been changed a little bit where they would have held the salons. So we didn't really think about maybe recreating them, but it was a big part of our life, right, Mark?
It was, yeah. I mean, it was. They met usually about once a month, and they were almost all Protestants Presbyterian minister, a wife of somebody who was Methodist. I mean, so there was always kind of a, they kind of got through that kind of the church world of the South in Milledgeville. So a lot of them had those connections. A guy who's now much older, he says, my dad, he wrote me and says, my dad was one of those people who did that. He was a car salesman and also a member of the Presbyterian Church. And so they would gather them around to read these things, novels as well as, she read Camus. So, I mean, she knew who Camus was. So,
and one of the reviewers, Tate, was at the salon as a younger person, and he gave us a great review out of Connecticut.
He was friends.
That's right. Yeah. I thought you meant Barbara Tate, who died.
Yeah. Barbara Tate. Barbara Tate's son.
Frank asked, interesting to know if she read or watched much Tennessee Williams.
I wondered that too.
Mark, you're the guy.
I don't think so. I think what they have in common, though, is that Tennessee Williams understood the operatic as a dramatic form in play, as opposed to just opera. He knew how to create something that could be Tosca, but just set in some, antebellum place in the South. So I don't think that she was aware of him. I think she might have, but there's no record of her, doing more or knowing more than except to use him as a kind of a cultural reference. But I agree totally that there is a connection, and it is that fact of tragedy. Flannery O'Connor understands tragedy as a dramatic force in the world, and it wakes us up. Her tragedies usually end the same way that Tennessee Williams do. So I think that sense of the operatic, or, Flannery O'Connor, there's something almost operatic in these short little stories, or, that seem to me like what Williams does. That's my
It's not quite, I don't find it to be quite the same kind of lusciousness, melodrama of Faulkner or even Tennessee Williams, her writing. I think I really see her headed more down that modernist pathway of direct, observational, and a little less opera. I mean, the violence and the death, sure, that can go into the operatic, but she wrote about it from this, I find her style a little more modernist in some interesting ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there. I think if you look at some of the ways that she deals with death and redemption, though, I think it's very much a Tennessee Williams kind of moment. But you're right. I mean, she's obviously, she can only do so much in a short story, so she's going to use that modernist kind of formalist way of getting the reader right into her stories with particular, concrete, focused kind of places and personalities. Yeah.
Catherine, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. How significant was Iowa in the trajectory of her career?
Very. Elizabeth?
I mean, just over the top, very much everything hinged on that, or what do you think?
Well, I think, we spent a lot of time, I mean, it started in Georgia. So being a Southerner, I think it's important to speak up for the good teachers she had at Georgia College in Milledgeville, Georgia. She had a couple of a great sociology professor who got her to apply to Iowa. And so she had some great teachers in Georgia who had her thinking about philosophy. She was doing journalism. She was doing the cartooning. And so her ambitions were upheld, and that got her. But she went to Iowa to do journalism at first. And pretty quickly she walked in the front door of the writing workshop and said, hey, I'm a fiction writer. I'm just not a journalist. So from that point on, as you see in the film, I think, the teachers she had there, the Iowa Writers Workshop was just, had just been born and had these incredible, we had the Southern literary renaissance that was connected to a Catholic literary renaissance. And she just connected with Robert Lowell, with Caroline Gordon, with Alan Tate, with some significant figures who all came through the Iowa Writers Workshop and recognized her talent. So, you know, Iowa is where she really was birthed, I think. But
you know, she said she never read Dostoevsky. She had never read anything that wasn't kind of just out of her little Southern, you know, Milledgeville world. And it was really, it was her teachers that says, you know, here's a list of things you have to read. You've got to read these people if you're going to be a great writer, you know? And so I think without Iowa, she would have not gotten focused so quickly. And I think there could have been more stumbling. But what it did is it just put her on track. And then she never really got off the track. And what I find helpful, what I think she found out is that she realized she thought she was good. I think she always thought that she was smart and had the talent. There, she really trusted the people who told her that for the first time, because it's not what her mother or her cousins or anybody else, or even a sociology teacher. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, everyone's looking for would read her story. Brad Gooch does a great job in his biography because he goes back and he interviews all the people that were still alive, and they said, oh, I mean, she never said anything, but every time a famous person came in, they had all talked to each other and said, you got to read that Flannery O'Connor. And they would go in and read Flannery O'Connor all the time. And these people were like, you know, I want to write my big novel. And we have to listen to this woman, you know, from the South. But so the writers that they were bringing in for 1 week at a time or 2 weeks at a time were talking to each other and say, you got to take a look at this Flannery O'Connor. And so I think it's fascinating. To your point, it just put her on a track and it affirmed her so well. And she learned a lot.
But she was also from enough of a privileged white background in the South and the college supported her. She was already looking towards New York, she wanted to be published in the New Yorker. She wanted to, you know, she took trips to the Northeast. So even before she got to Iowa, her ambition was there. Iowa is where she learned to be a great writer and better read.
Yeah, that got perspective on which is really important.
There were smart Southerners too. I think that's important to say.
So,
is there a bias? Is there a bias?
I'm just saying there were smart people in the South too. They weren't all.
yeah, okay.
This was before COVID. Are we? Just kidding.
Go next on television and when?
So
No when.
We don't. It's the first quarter of 2021. So that was the first 3 months, I guess. We will have some dates then, but we're really excited for it. Yeah.
And Ted and Elizabeth, what are you working on now? Are we ever going to get the Venice film finished?
Good question.
Well, we actually just did an overview of all of our environmental work for. I don't know, it seems like for like over a 10, 15-year period to help launch a master's degree in Venice, Italy by a friend of ours who's a subject in several of our films. And so it's good. We should send that link around.
Yeah, so we have a film called Venice is Thinking, and we're looking at the environmental challenges that Venice is facing, and I'd say that's in post-production. We just did a few interviews in Jacksonville, Florida, with some civil rights activists, and so I'm starting in development doc on my hometown, and
then probably closer to being finished is what you might have seen a little bit of, Bart, is The Gathering of Strangers, which is the documentary of an experimental New York theater group who's in actually our film in Flannery, who does Flannery O'Connor plays, Karen Coonrod, but she mounted The Merchant of Venice in the Jewish ghetto for the first time ever, and we documented that whole process before, a year prior, and then during the rehearsal audition, and all the way through the run of the entire play. And it's got, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's grandson is in it, so she came to opening night. Colin Powell's daughter plays Portia. So it's some interesting characters in a fascinating location, the Jewish ghetto. So
And grappling with anti-Semitism
Yeah.
and The Merchant of Venice and
Right.
Shakespeare.
Obviously, I mean, it's like, you know, just like in this film, there's racism is sort of, you know, an undercurrent, but as we're all looking at this in a different kind of way. And that will be finished soon, someday, I hope.
And we hope. Yeah.
I mean, where do you send films right now? It's fascinating, as you know, Bart. Right?
Hey, we're doing our DocuFest in a drive-in movie theater.
I love it. I love it.
So we keep it going. So Mark, my last question of the evening. What's your next film going to be?
Boy, I'm still thinking about that.
Vatican III.
Vatican III.
Vatican II.
Yeah. No, I you know, this was just a project that a passion project for me. And if I do any more film, I'll definitely be calling Elizabeth and Ted to see if they want to join me. But no, I'm just so pleased to have that we've given birth to this film, and my hope is that people will continue to read Flannery, and that the film will say, oh, you know what, I should pick up her short stories. And I'm teaching a whole seminar. We're reading Flannery O'Connor 24/7, all on Zoom apparently. But it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm going to use a lot of the stuff from our film, so it'll be fun.
Although Mark, if he ever jumps back in, I've been encouraging him because he knows a lot about Hildegard von Bingen, a very underknown figure in our world. Fascinating, and yeah, there needs to be some work done on her.
Hildegard von Bingen.
On that.
She's been gone a while.
Just a little bit.
Yes. Yeah.
So guys, thank you so much. This is even longer than we normally do, but what a great discussion.
Yeah.
I really appreciate Mark, you being on. It's the first time I've got to do a Q&A with you, and it's wonderful to hear your perspective. And Ted, Elizabeth, it's always a pleasure talking to you. And all of you, thank you for coming this week.
Thank
Raquel,
you.
do we know what we're doing next week?
No, but we're doing the 13th on the 26th.
We're doing the 13th on the 26th. Okay, got it.
I can say something, not because I like Bart, but you guys have a treasure in not just I know wherever Bart is, there's a Bart team. We're in Chicago, Mark's in DC. There's a lot of really smart folks, but the way Team Bart builds a community think tank, it's really lovely, and
We know.
Yeah, I know you know, but
Bart's a gift.
I want to make sure you guys know that other people in other cities, we see it too. We need more Barts.
We
need more
do.
Team Barts.
We need more Bart.
Okay.
We want him in Chicago.
Thank you all so much. So after this is recorded, it'll take a few moments, and then later on tonight, I will put this up on either YouTube or Vimeo. So if any of you want the link, we're keeping these on the Video Fest front page. So
Great.
thank you all so much for coming. You know, in this world, the way it is, to have a really nice discussion about culture in a really nuanced way, it's just really rewarding.
Amazing.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dallas.
Bye now.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye.